Dear all viewers, you are listening the Alpa's King love story. In that story, you will enjoy a lot of thrilled, love, and more interesting ending. Before starting story, please subscribe my channel because your one like and subscribe means a lot to me. And after it, please share your thoughts on comments. And if you like the story, so share it with your circle as well. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Whisper at the Solstice. The air in the grand hall of Aldoria was thick with the scent of pine smoke and ancient stone, a heavy perfume of power and tradition. Tonight was the winter solstice gathering, a night when the veil between the ordinary and the mystical grew thin, and the Lycan king Alaric of the House of Thorn surveyed his domain. His frame, tall and imposing even without the latent power that hummed beneath his skin, was a pillar of quiet authority amidst the swirling silks and diplomatic murmurs. His eyes, a stormy gray that could shift to molten gold in an instant, scanned the crowd with a detached, royal boredom. He had presided over these gatherings for a century, and they had long since lost their charm, a parade of posturing nobles and hopeful families presenting their sons and daughters, all vying for a glance, a word, a favor from the Wolf King. Among the sea of eager faces, one was a study in contrast. Ilara did not push forward. She did not simper or preen. She stood near a great arched window, the silver light of the full moon casting a halo around her simple, dark gown. Her posture was straight but not stiff, her hands clasped gently before her. She watched the proceedings not with hunger but with a deep, unsettling stillness, as if she were listening to a song only she could hear. Her hair, the color of rich mahogany, fell in loose waves, and her eyes, a clear and penetrating hazel, held a wisdom that seemed out of place in someone so young. She was here not by grand ambition, but by reluctant duty, a daughter of a fading noble house hoping to secure a minor alliance, nothing more. The ritual of presentations began. One by one, eligible young men and women from prominent Lycan families were brought before the dais. Alaric acknowledged each with a minimal nod, his mind already wandering to the reports of rogue wolf activity in the northern territories. The cycle was endless, until a commotion near the doors broke the monotony. A young beta from a western pack, bold with ale and ambition, shouldered his way toward Alara. He was handsome in a brash way, his chest puffed out, his smile too wide. "My lady," he boomed, drawing the attention of those nearby. "You've been hiding here all evening. A flower like you shouldn't be left in the shadows." He reached for her hand. "Come, dance with me. Let me show you the strength of the Western howlers." A faint ripple of interest went through the crowd, a minor drama. Alaric's gaze drifted over, mildly annoyed at the disruption. He saw the woman, Ilara, take a subtle step back, her expression not of fear, but of profound discomfort, as if the beta's very energy grated against her senses. "I thank you," she said, her voice low but carrying a curious clarity, "but I am not inclined to dance." "Nonsense," the beta laughed, grasping her wrist. "Every she-wolf is inclined to dance with a strong mate." The word mate hung in the air, charged and significant. It was then that Alaric felt it, a strange, sharp pull in his chest, a sensation entirely new and utterly commanding. His eyes locked onto the scene, the royal boredom evaporating under a fierce sun. His wolf, a presence he kept on a tight, unyielding leash, stirred with a low internal growl. Mine? The thought was primal, unbidden, shocking in its intensity. He moved before he consciously decided to, his long strides eating up the distance between the dais and the window. The crowd parted before him like wheat before a scythe, a hushed silence falling in his wake. The beta, finally sensing the shift in the atmospheric pressure of the room, dropped Ilara's wrist as if burned and stumbled back, paling. Alaric came to a halt before them, but his attention was solely on Ilara. Up close, her presence was even more disquieting. She smelled of night-blooming jasmine and cold starlight, a scent that cut through the hall's cloying aromas and went straight to his head. Her hazel eyes met his without flinching, without submission, but without challenge either. They simply saw him in a way no one had in a long time. His voice, when he spoke, was deceptively calm, a quiet rumble that vibrated in the marrow of every being present. "Is this man bothering you?" Ilara inclined her head. "It is of no consequence, Your Majesty, a minor misunderstanding." The beta stammered an apology and melted into the crowd, forgotten. Alaric did not look away at Ilara. The possessive pull tightened in his gut. He needed to know. The question was out before he could temper it with royal decorum. "Do you have a mate?" The hall ceased to breathe, hundreds of ears strained. To be asked such a direct, personal question by the king was unprecedented. It was a question loaded with implications, a seismic inquiry that could shift the foundations of pax and power. Ilara looked up at him, and for a fleeting second he saw something flicker in those hazel depths, a sadness, a secret, a lifetime of caution. Then it was gone, veiled behind a placid mask. She leaned forward just a little so only he could hear the words. Her whisper was a soft breath against the sudden stillness, a secret meant for him alone. "Not yet." 2 words, simple, innocuous on the surface, but the way she said them, the slight tremor of hope laced with an unfathomable sorrow, the promise in the "yet," unleashed something feral within him, a possessive, irrational jealousy, hot and black, coiled in his veins. His control, famed throughout the realms, snapped, not with a roar, but with a terrifying, silent intensity. The air around him crackled, and his stormy gray eyes bled into pure, radiant gold, the wolf surging to the forefront. A low, warning growl emanated from him, not loud, but so deep it resonated in the stone floor beneath their feet. The entire assembly recoiled, whispers died, hearts hammered against ribs. The Lycan king had just publicly and explosively claimed interest in an unknown female from a minor house, and she had ignited a king's fury with a whisper. Ilara did not cower. She held his blazing gaze, her own eyes wide but unwavering. She had not expected this. She had hoped to pass unnoticed, to fulfill her family's request and retreat into obscurity. But in that whispered confession, she had inadvertently thrown a spark on tinder she didn't know was there. As these silent confrontations stretched, the implications began to crash down like falling timber. Who was she?
What did her "not yet" truly mean, and what would a jealous, possessive Lycan king do to claim what his soul suddenly screamed was his? The game was no longer about alliances or diplomacy. It was about primal claiming, ancient destinies, and a secret buried behind a pair of haunted hazel eyes. The solstice had begun, and with it a storm that would shake the very foundations of the Lycan throne. Chapter 2. A Thorned Crown's Shadow. The oppressive silence in the grand hall lasted only a moment longer before fracturing into a cacophony of hushed, frantic whispers. All eyes were pinned on the 2 figures caught in the moonlit tableau by the window. The king, a statue of unleashed primal power with eyes of burning sun, and the girl, a slender reed of calm in the face of the gale. Alaric did not hear the whispers. His world had narrowed to the scent of jasmine and starlight, the quiet pulse he could see at the base of Alara's throat, and the echoing tremor of her words. Not yet. The yet was a hook in his soul, reeling him in against a current of pure instinctive fury. Who was she waiting for? The thought was a poison-tipped claw scraping down his spine. He forced a breath, a deliberate act that felt like moving stone. The golden fire in his eyes banked, retreating to a smoldering ring around his pupils, but the dangerous energy radiating from him did not diminish. He took a half-step closer, invading what little space remained between them. "Your name." It was not a request, it was a command from the depths of his wolf, rough and graveled. "Ilara," she said, her voice still that same clear, low stream. "Ilara of House Morn." House Morn, a minor eastern house known for its scholars and archivists, not its warriors. Fading into irrelevance, it made no sense. A king's mate, if such a thing were destined, would come from power, from a lineage that could bolster the throne. Yet his wolf snarled in satisfaction at the name, as if it were a missing piece clicking into place. "You will accompany me," Alaric stated, his tone brooking no argument. He did not offer his arm. This was not a courtly gesture. It was a retrieval. He turned, expecting her to follow, and the crowd fell back as if from a physical force. Ilara hesitated for only a heartbeat. She could feel the weight of hundreds of stares, a mixture of awe, envy, and outright hostility, especially from the clusters of she-wolves who had spent the evening hoping for the king's glance. To refuse the king was unthinkable. To follow him was to step into a spotlight she had never sought and did not want. With a final, fleeting look at the cold moon through the window, she gathered the skirts of her simple gown and followed in his wake, a silent shadow to his storm. He led her not to the throne dais, but through a side arch into a smaller, private antechamber lined with books and maps, his strategy room. The door closed with a soft, definitive click, shutting out the noise of the hall. The sudden intimacy was jarring. Here, the scent of him was overwhelming. Old leather, winter forest, and the sharp, clean scent of alpha power. He paced to the great stone fireplace, his back to her for a moment, shoulders tense. When he turned, his face was a mask of regal control, but his eyes still glinted with that dangerous gold. "Explain," he said, the single word laden with decades of command. Ilara stood her ground, though her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs. "Explain what, Your Majesty?" "Do not play games with me," he growled, the sound vibrating in the small room. "You stood in my hall. You spoke words that resonated. You look at me not as a subject looks upon a king, but as—" He trailed off, unable to articulate the unserving sense of being seen. "But I am a subject, Your Majesty," she replied, choosing her words with the care of a scribe transcribing a fragile scroll. "I am here because my family hoped for an audience, for a trade agreement to restore our lands, nothing more. My answer was merely the truth. I have no mate. The yet was a hope for the future, a personal hope. It was not meant as a provocation." "A hope," Alaric repeated, closing the distance between them again. He stopped an arm's length away, his gaze boring into hers. A hope for whom? For that posturing beta? For some hidden lover waiting in the shadows of your decaying house? The jealousy, so foreign and consuming, tinted every word. A spark of defiance, faint but real, lit in Alara's eyes. It was the first crack in her calm facade. "You insult my house and my honor with such assumptions, King Alaric. My hopes are my own. They are quiet and simple, and they do not involve becoming a spectacle in your court." She took a studying breath. "Please, allow me to return to the hall, and then to my home. This misunderstanding can be forgotten." "Forgotten?" He gave a short, humorless laugh. "Nothing about this will be forgotten. The court saw. They saw my reaction. If I let you walk away now, you would be seen as a rejected favorite, a target for every jealous claw and ambitious scheme. You would not last a moon cycle." He said it not as a threat, but as a cold, hard fact. "And he paused, the confession torn from him. "I cannot allow it." The admission hung between them. Ilara's breath caught. This was worse than she had imagined, far worse. She was caught not in a web of desire, but in a trap of primal possession and political consequence. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "You will remain at the capital," Alaric declared, his decision solidifying as he spoke. "Under the protection of the crown, you will be a guest of the palace. It is the only way to ensure your safety from the vipers out there, and from my own inability to let you go," the unspoken thought roared in his mind. "A prisoner," she stated flatly. "A ward," he countered, though the distinction felt thin even to him. "For how long?" "Until I understand what this is," he said, gesturing vaguely between them. "Until the court's attention shifts. Until I am certain of your—" intentions. Ilara felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. Her quiet life, her secluded studies, her cherished plans were all evaporating like morning mist. She was to be caged in a gilded palace, watched by a king whose emotions were a volatile tempest, all because of two foolishly whispered words. At that moment, a firm knock nodded on the door. Before Alaric could answer, it opened to reveal a man almost as tall as the king, with sharp, intelligent features and dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. Kaelin, the king's beta and oldest friend. His keen eyes took in the scene in an instant, the king's aggressive stance, the pale, resolute female.
"Your Majesty," Kaelin said, his voice calm and diplomatic. "The ambassador from the Silvermane pack is growing impatient for your audience, and the atmosphere in the hall is becoming speculative." His gaze flickered to Ilara with open curiosity and a hint of concern. Alaric's jaw tightened. Duty called, a relentless chain. He gave a curt nod. "See that Lady Ilara of House Morn is escorted to the Sunstone Wing. Assign her the Violet Chambers, and place a discreet guard for her protection." Kaelin's eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. The Violet Chambers were among the finest guest suites, reserved for esteemed allies, not minor nobility. "Of course, Your Majesty." He turned to Ilara, offering a shallow, polite bow. "My lady, if you would follow me." Ilara looked from Kaelin's polite mask to Alaric's unyielding expression. She was outmaneuvered and outpowered. With a dignity that felt like her last remaining armor, she inclined her head to the king. Not a bow of submission, but a simple acknowledgement. Then she turned and walked towards Kaelin, towards her new, glittering cage. As the door closed behind them, Ilaric stared into the fire, the ghost of her jasmine scent still haunting him. He had acted on pure, raw instinct. He had claimed a female he knew nothing about, upending his own court's politics in the process. And for what? Because of a whisper? Because of a feeling? But the feeling was undeniable. A connection, a pull, a claiming. And the mystery of her was a lure he could not resist. Who was Ilara Morn? What was the secret behind her "not yet"? And what savage, ancient part of him was howling that she was already his, whether she or he was ready to admit it or not? The hunt was no longer for rogue wolves in the north. It was for the truth in a pair of hazel eyes, and it had just begun within the very walls of his own palace. Chapter 3. The Violet Cage. The Sunstone Wing was, as its name suggested, a place of light. Its high vaulted ceilings were adorned with panels of carved amber that glowed warmly in the afternoon sun, and the thick carpets were the color of cream and saffron. It was a beautiful, serene, and utterly suffocating prison. The Violet Chambers were indeed lavish, a sitting room with plush divans and a harp in the corner, a bedroom with a canopied bed draped in silvery velvet, and a balcony overlooking the palace's private gardens, now dusted with a fragile layer of frost. Ilara stood on that balcony, her hands gripping the cold stone railing, trying to find a semblance of peace in the view. It was futile. Her mind was a whirlwind. The memory of King Alaric's golden-eyed fury, the possessive grip of his command, the sheer shocking intensity of his reaction, it replayed on a loop. She had spent a lifetime learning to be still, to be small, to observe without being observed. Her family's decline had taught her the safety of shadows. In one evening, the most powerful being in the realm had ripped her from those shadows and thrust her into the most glaring light imaginable. A soft knock preceded the entrance of a young maid, who carried a tray of tea and honey cakes. She was a slight thing with nervous eyes, setting the tray down with a quiet clatter. "My lady," she murmured, bobbing a curtsy, "is there anything else you require?" "No, thank you," Ilara said, her voice gentle. She saw the girl's fear.
Fear of her, this new mysterious favorite of the king. The rumor mill had already been grinding. She could sense it in the hushed tones of the guards outside her door, in the sidelong glances of servants in the corridor. She was either a sorceress who had enchanted the king, a cunning social climber, or a tragic pawn. None of the roles fit, and all of them were dangerous. "What is your name?" Ilara asked, turning from the balcony. The maid was startled. "Lena, my lady." "Thank you, Lena. The tea smells lovely." The small kindness seemed to confuse the girl further, and she scurried out. Alone again, Ilara sighed. She poured the tea, the floral steam doing little to calm her nerves. Her protection was a squad of 4 stern-faced royal guards posted at both ends of the corridor. Kalen, the king's beta, had been courteous but distant, his intelligent eyes missing nothing. She was a problem to be managed, an anomaly in the smooth running of the kingdom. As dusk painted the sky in shades of violet and deep blue, a different visitor arrived. This time the knock was confident. At Ilara's permission, the door opened to reveal a woman of striking beauty and formidable presence. She had hair like spun silver and eyes of a piercing glacial blue. Her gown was of the finest icy silk, and she moved with a grace that spoke of both power and absolute certainty. This was Lady Selene of the Frostfang pack, a renowned she-alpha, and, according to court gossip, the most persistent candidate for the position of queen. "Lady Ilara," she said, her voice a smooth, cold stream. She did not wait for an invitation, but glided into the sitting room, her gaze sweeping the opulent surroundings with a barely concealed flicker of irritation. "I thought it only right to welcome you to the Sunstone Wing. These are remarkable chambers for a first-time guest." The barb was expertly delivered. Ilara set her cup down. "Lady Selene, the king's generosity is indeed surprising." "Surprising is one word for it," Selene agreed, stopping before the fireplace and turning to face Ilara fully. Her smile was flawless and utterly devoid of warmth. "The king is a man of politics, a strategist, a ruler who thinks in decades, not moments. For him to act so publicly, so forcefully over a whisper—" She tilted her head, a predator assessing prey. "What did you really say to him?" The memory of that charged moment flashed. Ilaric's intense question, her own desperate whispered truth. "I answered a question with honesty, nothing more." "Honesty." Selene let out a soft, musical laugh that chilled the room. "A dangerous currency at court, my dear. It gets people banished, or worse." She circled Ilara slowly, letting me offer you some honesty in return. The king needs a queen who can strengthen his reign, one from a powerful pack, one who understands the burdens of the crown, one who can give him strong heirs. A dalliance with a pretty face from a fading house is a distraction he cannot afford, and distractions have a habit of disappearing.
The threat, though veiled in elegant language, was crystal clear. Ilara's spine straightened. "I have no interest in being a distraction or a dalliance. I wish only to return home." "A wise wish," Selene said, her smile returning. "Perhaps we can help that wish come true. A word from the right people, a gentle persuasion. It could be arranged. It would be for the good of the kingdom, after all, and for your own safety. The spotlight here is harsh, and it burns those not accustomed to its heat." Before Ilara could respond, a new voice cut through the tension, deep and resonant from the doorway. "Lady Selene, your concern for our guests' welfare is noted." Alaric stood in the open door, having entered without a sound. He had changed from his formal solstice attire into simpler dark trousers and a gray tunic that did nothing to diminish his commanding presence. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, fixed on Selene, were cool. Selene did not startle. She merely turned her perfect smile on him, though it gained a new predatory edge. Your Majesty, I was just welcoming Lady Ilara to the palace, ensuring she feels at home. I am capable of ensuring the comfort of my guests, Alaric said, his tone leaving no room for argument. The council awaits your input on the northern border tariffs, Celine. Your expertise would be invaluable. Dismissed. Politely, firmly dismissed. A faint blush of anger colored Celine's porcelain cheeks, but she bowed her head. Of course, Your Majesty. She shot one last inscrutable look at Ilara. We will speak again, Lady Ilara. Enjoy the view. She swept from the room, leaving a trail of frosty perfume behind. Alaric closed the door and turned to Ilara. The space felt immediately smaller, charged with the unresolved energy from the night before. She threatened you, he stated, not a question. She offered me a path home, Ilara corrected, though her heart was pounding. A path that leads over a cliff. Alaric grunted, walking to the balcony doors. He looked out, his profile stark in the dying light. She is not wrong about one thing. The court is a dangerous place. My reaction has made you a target. Then let me leave, Ilara pleaded, taking a step toward him. Let me go home. The speculation will die and your court will return to normal. He turned his head, his gray eyes finding hers. In the twilight, they looked almost silver. It is too late for that. He took a step closer, his gaze searching her face. Tell me the truth, Ilara, the complete truth. Why did you come to the gathering? She swallowed. I told you, for my family, for a trade agreement. And before you whispered, not yet, what were you thinking? The question was too intimate. It probed at the secret place in her heart she kept locked away. She looked down, her mahogany hair falling like a curtain. I was thinking that the moon was beautiful and that I felt alone. In a hall of people, I felt completely alone. The yet was a foolish, desperate hope that one day I might not be. She looked up, her hazel eyes glistening with unshed tears of frustration and fear. It was not a signal. It was not a challenge. It was a moment of weakness, and it has cost me my freedom. Her raw honesty disarmed him. The kingly anger, the possessive jealousy, momentarily receded, leaving behind something more complex, a pang of understanding, a flicker of guilt. He too knew the profound loneliness of the crown. He had felt it for a century. To hear it echoed in her voice so simply and sadly struck a chord deep within him. Your freedom is not lost, he said, his voice softer than she had heard it. It is changing shape. I cannot undo what happened, but I can promise you this. No harm will come to you while you are under my protection. Not from Celine, not from any scheming courtier, not from anyone. The vow was absolute, the alpha in him rising to the forefront. And what of the harm from you, Your Majesty? The question slipped out, bold and trembling. Alaric went very still. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackle of the fire. That, he said, finally, the word heavy, is the one thing I cannot promise to control, but I will try. It was not the reassurance she sought, but it was, she sensed, the only truth he could offer. He was as much a prisoner of this strange pull as she was. He gave her one last, long look, as if memorizing her face in the firelight, then turned and left, closing the door softly behind him. Ilara sank onto the divan, her strength evaporating. She was caught between a jealous king and a threatened court, her every word and move now under a microscope. But as she replayed his final words, a new, more terrifying question arose. What if the king's uncontrollable pull towards her was not the greatest threat? What if the real threat was the secret she carried, the reason behind her true loneliness, a secret that, if discovered, could make a king's jealousy look like a mild annoyance? The walls of the violet cage felt like they were closing in, and the only key was a truth she dared not speak.
Chapter 4: Whispers in the Archive. The following days in the Sunstone Wing settled into a tense, watchful rhythm. Ilara was treated with impeccable courtesy, her meals were exquisite, her chambers kept spotless by the timid Lina, who was gradually warming to her quiet mistress. The guards remained, silent sentinels at their posts. But the gilded cage was still a cage. Ilara's only reprieve came in the form of a single unexpected concession from the king: access to the royal archives. It was a testament to Kaelin's observation. He had noted her family's scholarly reputation and suggested it as a way to occupy her mind and perhaps make her feel less like a prisoner. Alaric, his own mind a tempest of conflicting impulses, agreed. The archives were deep in the oldest part of the palace, a labyrinth of soaring shelves packed with scrolls, codices, and ancient leather-bound tomes. The air smelled of dust, vellum, and time. For Ilara, it was a sanctuary. Here, amidst the silent history of the Lycan realm, she could breathe. She could forget for a few hours the weight of the king's gaze and the court's suspicion. She began with harmless texts, histories of the great packs, botanical guides to the northern forests. She was careful, so careful to not draw attention, but her true purpose for embracing this privilege was far from academic leisure. She was searching for answers, answers about herself. The feeling she carried, the profound sense of being an outsider even among her own kind, had a source. Her grandmother, on her deathbed, had pressed a worn silver medallion in her hand and whispered cryptic words about the old blood and the silent moon.
She had warned Ilara to hide her true nature, to never speak of the deep connection she felt to the natural world, a connection that went beyond the normal senses of a Lycan. It was why crowds overwhelmed her, why the beta's aggressive energy had felt like a physical assault. She was different, and in a world that prized pack conformity and primal strength, different was dangerous. She needed to understand what she was, and if the archives of the Lycan King held no clues, then nowhere did. One afternoon, deep in a shadowy aisle dedicated to genealogy and obscure bloodline records, she found it. Not an answer, but a signpost. A massive, crumbling tome titled Lineages of the Lost Houses. Her fingers, dusty and careful, traced down the brittle pages. House Morn was listed, its decline documented with dry finality. But a marginal note, written in a different, older hand, caught her eye. It was next to the name of her great-great-grandmother, Syra Morn. Intermarriage with the Sylvan suspected, the quiet ones, their gifts faded with the mist. Ilara's heart thumped against her ribs. Sylvans. It was a name from half-remembered fireside tales, not history books. They were spoken of as myth, a reclusive clan of Lycans who did not draw their power from the raging wolf, but from the still, deep magic of the moon and the earth. They were healers, seers, listeners. They were said to have vanished centuries ago, assimilated or destroyed. Was this her secret? Was she a throwback, a remnant of this lost line? The silent moon her grandmother mentioned. A soft scuff of a boot on stone shattered her concentration. She slammed the heavy book shut, a cloud of dust rising around her. She turned, expecting a librarian or perhaps Kaelin checking up on her. It was Alaric. He stood at the end of the aisle, leaning against a shelf, watching her. He wore no crown, no royal insignia, just dark clothes that made him seem like a part of the shadows themselves. How long had he been there? His expression was unreadable, his intense gaze taking in her startled posture, the dust on her fingers, the closed tome before her. "Finding the histories to your liking, Lady Ilara?" His voice was a low rumble in the quiet. "They are comprehensive, Your Majesty," she said, subtly wiping her hands on her skirts. "Thank you for the privilege."
He pushed off the shelf and walked toward her slowly. The confined space of the aisle magnified his presence, making him seem larger, more potent. The scent of winter forest and alpha enveloped her. You seek solitude. I understand that. This place offers it. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes dropping to the book she had closed. Lost Houses, a somber subject. It is my house's subject, she replied, keeping her voice even. You look for your place in it, he surmised, his gaze lifting to her face. He was too perceptive. You are not like the others at court. You do not preen, you do not plot. You hide in libraries and look at the moon. He took another step, reducing the distance to an arm's length. Her breath hitched. I am no mystery, King Alaric. I am a simple woman in a complicated situation. Simple women do not hold the attention of kings with a whisper, he countered, his voice dropping. Simple women do not look at me as if they can see the weight of every decision I've ever made. You see me, Alara, truly see me, and it is unsettling. He admitted it with a rawness that surprised even him. She dared to hold his stormy gaze. Perhaps you are not used to being seen, only obeyed and feared. A flicker of something, acknowledgement, pain crossed his features. Perhaps, he looked away, his jaw tightening. My counsel presses me. Celine's faction grows more vocal. They demand stability. They demand a queen of their choosing. They see you as an obstacle. Then remove the obstacle, she whispered, the plea escaping her again. His head snapped back to her, his eyes flashing with that familiar possessive gold. Do not ask that of me. The command was guttural. I cannot. He closed the final distance, not touching her, but the heat of his body was a tangible force. He lifted a hand, as if to touch her cheek, but stopped himself, his fingers curling into a fist at his side. The struggle for control was visible in the taut line of his neck, the clench of his jaw. This connection, this pull, do you not feel it? She did. Oh, she did. It was a magnetic thrum in her blood, a dizzying attraction that warred with every instinct of self-preservation. Her skin prickled, her heart raced in a way that had nothing to do with fear. But to admit it was to step off a cliff into an abyss she could not fathom. I feel that I am a source of conflict for you, she evasively said, taking a small step back, her shoulders brushing against the shelves. My kingdom is my concern, he growled, the sound echoing softly in the dusty silence. You are becoming my concern. He leaned in, his voice a heated whisper near her ear. I have questioned every instinct since the moment I laid eyes on you. My duty, my logic, my centuries of rule, all scream that this is a mistake, that you are a complication I cannot afford. But my wolf, my soul, they recognize you, and they will not be silenced. Alara trembled, trapped between the cold shelf and the blazing heat of him. His confession was terrifying in its intensity. It spoke of a destiny she was not prepared to accept. What do they recognize? She breathed. He admitted, his breath stirring her hair. He pulled back just enough to look into her eyes, his own filled with a turbulent mix of frustration and yearning. But I intend to find out, and until I do, you will stay. Not as a prisoner, Alara, not as a ward, but as a guest I cannot bear to lose sight of. It was a different kind of sentence, one spoken not from royal decree, but from a place of deep, bewildering need. Before she could form a response, the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the archive. Kalen appeared at the head of the aisle, his expression grim. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. A rider has just arrived from the Northern Watch. It's urgent. The king in Alaric immediately surfaced, the vulnerable, searching man retreating behind a mask of sharp focus. The moment shattered. He gave Alara one last lingering look, a promise of a conversation unfinished, and turned to Kalen. In my council chamber, now. He strode away without a backward glance, Kaelin falling into step beside him, already speaking in low tones about border breaches and rogue signatures.
Alara slumped against the bookshelf, her legs weak. Her skin still burned where his breath had touched it. His words echoed in her mind. My soul. They recognize you. What did that mean? And what did it have to do with the note about sylvan blood in a forgotten book? The danger was no longer just from a jealous court or a possessive king. The danger was the dawning realization that the secret she hid might be the very reason for the king's devastating claim. And if that secret ever came to light, it wouldn't just change her fate, it could change the fate of the entire Lycan kingdom. The archives held their breath around her, keeping their secrets as she clutched the silver medallion hidden beneath her gown and feared the truth it represented. Chapter 5. The Northern Threat. The palace, which had been humming with the low-grade tension of courtly intrigue, now shifted to a different, more martial frequency. The urgent news from the north was a stark reminder that King Aloric's world extended far beyond the Sunstone Wing and its mysterious guest. Rogue Lycans, not part of any recognized pack, were launching coordinated, vicious attacks on border settlements. They were unlike ordinary rogues, more organized, more savage, and seemingly devoid of the pack sense that usually prevented such indiscriminate violence. They were a shadow spreading across his kingdom, and it demanded the king's full attention. Alara felt the change in atmosphere like a shift in barometric pressure. The guards outside her door were replaced by new ones, their faces harder, their attention focused outward. The courtiers' whispers turned from gossip to grim speculation about war. Lady Celine was suddenly everywhere, a vision of icy competence, advising on supply lines and rallying support from the warrior packs. She was in her element, a queen in waiting proving her worth. For 3 days, Alara saw nothing of Alaric. His absence should have been a relief. Instead, the chambers felt emptier, the silence more profound. She found herself listening for the sound of his boots in the corridor, a habit that both annoyed and frightened her. She buried herself deeper in the archives, but her research felt futile now, overshadowed by the reality of a kingdom on the brink of conflict. On the 4th day, as a cold rain lashed against her balcony windows, the door to her sitting room opened without a knock. Alaric stood there, dressed for travel in dark practical leathers and a thick cloak. He looked older, wearier, with new lines of strain around his eyes, but his presence still filled the doorway. "I am riding north at dawn," he stated without preamble, his voice rough with fatigue and command. Alara rose from her seat by the fire. "For how long?" "As long as it takes to crush this threat." His gaze swept over her, as if assuring himself she was still there, whole and unharmed. "The palace will not be as secure in my absence. Kaelin remains to manage the court, but his attention will be divided." A flicker of fear, cold and sharp, went through her. "Lady Celine?" "Will also be coming north," he finished, a grim satisfaction in his tone. "Her pack's forces are among the strongest, her presence on the front is necessary, and it removes her from the palace." He stepped into the room, closing the door. The firelight played over the planes of his face. "This does not mean you are safe. There are others who see you as a weakness to be exploited. You must be careful." "I am always careful," she murmured. He came closer, stopping before her. The scent of rain and cold air clung to him. "I have given orders. You are to have the freedom of the inner gardens and the archives still, but your guards are doubled. You are not to walk alone. Do you understand?" It was an order from her king, but his eyes held something more, a plea from the man. "I understand." He studied her face for a long moment, as if memorizing it. The silence between them was thick, charged with all the unspoken words and unresolved tension of the past days. The pull was there, a physical ache in the space between them, magnified by the impending separation. "When I return," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate rumble that vibrated in his chest, "we will have answers, Alara, about this, about us,
he gestured between them. "I will have the truth." Her heart hammered. "And if the truth is not what you wish to hear?" A shadow crossed his face. "Then I will bear it, but I must know." He reached out, and this time he did not stop himself. His fingers, calloused and warm, brushed a stray strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, sending a shock through her entire system. It was not a kiss, not an embrace, but it was more intimate than either. It was a claiming touch, gentle yet absolute. "Stay safe," he whispered, the words a vow and a command rolled into one. Then he turned and was gone, the door closing with a soft, definitive click, leaving behind the echo of his touch on her skin and the scent of impending storm. The next morning, the palace was a hive of controlled chaos. From her balcony, Alara watched the courtyard below. Warriors in the livery of a dozen packs milled around, checking gear and saddling horses. At the center of it all was Alaric, astride a massive black stallion, looking every inch the warrior king. Lady Celine, resplendent in silver-edged armor, mounted a sleek gray mare beside him, speaking to him with a confident smile. The sight sent an irrational, sharp pang through Alara, a feeling she refused to name as jealousy. As the column rode out through the great gates, a strange, hollow feeling opened up inside her. The source of her greatest anxiety was gone, yet she felt more vulnerable than ever. The palace felt like a giant, empty shell. Days bled into one another. Kalen was true to his word, checking on her periodically, but he was swamped with managing the capital's defenses and the flow of information from the north. The reports were troubling. The rogues were using strange hit-and-run tactics. They avoided direct confrontation with the king's forces, instead striking at undefended villages with a brutality that spoke of madness. Alara spent her permitted time in the gardens, the winter bare branches clawing at a gray sky. It was on one such walk, with 2 guards trailing at a respectful distance, that she felt it. A pull, different from the one she felt toward Alaric. This was a silent, magnetic tug toward a secluded part of the garden, a walled-off section said to hold the palace's ancient, dormant moonwell. Ignoring a prickle of warning, she followed the feeling. The guards, unfamiliar with this part of the grounds, hesitated but followed. The old wooden gate to the moonwell garden was overgrown with ivy. She pushed it open. Inside, it was a world frozen in time. In the center was a stone basin, dry and cracked, filled with dead leaves. But the air hummed with a latent silvery energy. It called to that strange, quiet place within her. Without thinking, she walked to the edge of the well and placed her hand on the cold stone. Without thinking, she walked to the edge of the well and placed her hand on the cold stone. A jolt, like static shock but deeper, colder, shot up her arm. Images, fragmented and chaotic, flooded her mind. A forest under a black moon, eyes glowing with sickly yellow light. A symbol carved into bark, a crescent moon pierced by a thorn, and a feeling of profound, aching wrongness. She gasped, snatching her hand back as if burned. "My lady," one of the guards called, concerned. "It's nothing," she said, her voice unsteady. "The cold startled me." But it was not nothing. The vision had been clear, terrifying, and the symbol, she had seen it before, in the archives, in a bestiary detailing dark omens. It was the mark of the shadowed crescent, a cult of Lycans who were said to have rejected the moon's true light and embraced a corrupted, frenzied power. They were supposed to be legend, a bedtime story to frighten pups. Were these the rogues Alaric was fighting? Was it a cult, not just mindless violence? That night, a fierce winter storm battered the palace. As Alara tried to sleep, the wind howling like a dire wolf, the connection she had felt at the moonwell throbbed in her mind. She sat bolt upright in bed, a scream lodged in her throat. Not a sound, but a feeling, a wave of searing pain, of rage, and of desperate animal fear. It was not her own. It was Alaric's. The bond, the mysterious pull he spoke of, had suddenly and violently snapped taut across the miles. She could feel him, not in thought or image, but in raw emotion. He was wounded, he was fighting, and he was in mortal danger. Terror, cold and absolute, drenched her. She scrambled from the bed, clutching her medallion. The palace was asleep, the wind raging outside. She was alone with this horrific knowledge. What could she do? She was no warrior. She was a prisoner in a tower, feeling the king's life force flicker like a candle in the wind. The pull was no longer just an attraction or a curiosity. It was a lifeline, and it was screaming in agony. As the storm raged outside, a storm of fear and helplessness raged within Alara. The northern threat was not just an army, it was a darkness with a symbol, and it had its claws in the king. And she, the silent girl with the old blood, was perhaps the only one in the entire palace who knew he was dying. The weight had become a torture. The gilded cage had just become a vault of sheer, unbearable panic. Chapter 6. The Bond That Binds. The night was an eternity. Alara did not sleep. She paced the silken carpets of her chamber until they felt worn thin, each howl of the wind sounding like a cry of pain. The connection, that terrifying, intimate thread that had woven itself between her soul and Alaric's, throbbed like a wound. The initial surge of agony had subsided into a dull, constant ache, a weary, battered sensation that was not her own. He was alive, but he was hurt. The knowledge was a stone in her stomach. At first light, gray and miserable, she dressed with trembling hands and demanded to see Kalen. The beta arrived promptly, his usual composure frayed at the edges, dark smudges under his eyes. The news from the north was not good. His tense posture said it all. "Lady Alara, is something wrong?" he asked, his voice all business. She had rehearsed the words, knowing how insane they would sound. "The king, he's injured badly." Kalen's sharp eyes narrowed sharp. "Our last dispatch, received just before dawn, reported a skirmish. He took a wound, but it was not considered grave. How could you possibly know that?" She couldn't tell him about the bond. He'd think her mad, or worse, a witch. She grasped for an excuse. I had a dream, a vivid one. I felt it." It was a pathetic lie, and they both knew it. Kalen studied her, his gaze analytical. He saw her genuine pallor, the fear in her eyes that was too deep to be feigned. He had seen the king's obsession with her. He was a man who dealt in facts and strategy, but he also knew the world held mysteries even Lycan science could not explain. "The dream," he said slowly. "What else did you see?" Encouraged, Alara pressed on. A forest, very dark, a symbol carved into the trees, a crescent moon pierced by a thorn. Kalen went utterly still. All professional detachment vanished, replaced by stark alarm. The shadowed crescent, he breathed the name like a curse. That information was withheld from all general dispatches. Only the King's War Council knows that symbol's association with these rogues. He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "You could not have known that, my lady. Not from a dream, not from any book in the open archives." She was trapped. Her secret was unraveling at the worst moment. She lifted her chin, meeting his probing stare. "I don't know how I know, Kalen. I just do. And I know he is in more danger than your dispatches say. The wound is worse. He is fading." The last word was a whisper choked with the emotion she felt through the bond. Kalen, the king's most loyal friend and protector, made a decision. He trusted his instincts, and right now every instinct screamed that this woman, for reasons unknown, was connected to Alaric in a vital way. "Come with me," he said abruptly, turning towards the door. "Now." He led her not to the council chambers, but back down to the archives, to a locked, secluded section she had never seen. He produced a heavy key and opened an iron-bound door. Inside was a small, circular room lined with maps. At its center was a large, polished table of obsidian stone. "This is the king's strategic sanctum," Kalen explained, closing the door. Now, tell me everything, from the beginning, and do not lie to me." Cornered and desperate for someone to believe her, Ilara broke. She told him of the strange pull she felt from the moment she saw Alaric. She described the overwhelming sensations in crowds, her family's quiet warnings, her research into the Sylvan bloodline. She told him of the Moonwell vision, the symbol, the feeling of wrongness. And finally, with her face flushed with shame and fear, she described the violent emotional jolt in the night, the certainty of Alaric's suffering. Kaelin listened in silence, his expression growing graver with each revelation. When she finished, he let out a long, weary breath. "A Sylvan, by the great moon. I thought the line was extinct." He ran a hand through his silver-streaked hair. "It explains much, your sensitivity, your aversion to the court's chaos. The Sylvans were empaths, deeply tied to the natural and lunar energies. They felt what others could not. And this bond you describe, it is not unheard of. The old texts speak of true mate bonds that can form across distance, a soul-deep recognition.
But they are rare, once-in-a-generation phenomena. And for it to form with a Sylvan?" He shook his head, the implications staggering. "Is he going to die?" The question tore from her, raw and helpless. "Not if I can help it," Kaelin said, his jaw setting with determination. He moved to the map table, where markers denoted troop positions. "Your vision, if that's what it was, confirms our worst fears. This is not a random rogue uprising. It's a coordinated attack by the Shadowed Crescent. They use dark magic to induce a berserker frenzy in their followers, stripping them of pack sense and mercy. They are fanatics, and if they have managed to seriously wound the king..." He pointed to a spot deep in the Whispering Woods. "He was leading a scouting party here. The main camp is a day's march away. If he's incapacitated, they are isolated." "We have to help him," Alara cried. "We will do no such thing," Kaelin said firmly. "I am mobilizing a swift cavalry unit to reinforce them, but you, my lady, will remain here. A Sylvan empath on a battlefield would be a catastrophic liability. You would feel every death, every drop of spilled blood as if it were your own. It would shatter your mind." "But the bond..." "The bond is precisely why you must stay. If, by the old tales, it is a true mate bond, then your stability might be tied to his. If you fall into panic or despair, it could weaken him further. Your task is to remain calm, to hold on, to be an anchor, not a casualty." The logic was brutal, but it made sense. Her role was not to wield a sword, but to endure, to feel his pain and not break under it. It was a terrible, invisible battle. "What can I do?" she asked, her voice small. "Meditate. Focus. Use whatever Sylvan practices you know to fortify your own spirit. The archives here have a few sealed texts on old lunar rituals. I will have them brought to you. They may help you shield yourself, or even reach out to him." He said the last part hesitantly, stepping into the realm of myth. If the bond is real, perhaps it can work both ways, not just to receive his pain, but to send him strength. The idea was both terrifying and hopeful. Could she do that? Could she touch his mind across the leagues with nothing but her will and this strange silvery blood in her veins? For the next 2 days, Alara became a student of desperation. Kaelin provided the texts, crackling scrolls written in archaic tongues that somehow felt familiar to her fingers. She read of lunar harmony, of mental fortresses, of sending one's essence along threads of connection. She tried. In the quiet of her chamber or the secluded Moonwell garden, she would close her eyes, grasp her medallion, and think of Alaric. Not the fierce, jealous king, but the weary man in the archive, the one who saw her. She would envision a cool, silvery light, like moonlight on still water, and imagined sending it down the throbbing, painful bond toward the source of the ache. At first, she felt nothing but her own straining effort. Then, on the second night, as she sat by her window under a sliver of a moon, something shifted. The constant ache in her chest eased just a fraction,
It was as if a balm had been applied to a burn, and for a fleeting second, not an emotion, but an image flashed behind her eyes. The canopy of dense pines, the flicker of a campfire, and a pair of storm-gray eyes, clouded with pain but startlingly clear, looking up as if they could see her through the veil of night and distance. He had felt it. Her attempt at solace had reached him. A sob of relief and exertion broke from her. It was working. She was not helpless. She could be his anchor. But the effort was draining. Each attempt left her pale and trembling, as if she had run for miles, and the bond, while slightly soothed, still pulsed with the danger he was in. Kalen's cavalry had not yet made contact. The wait continued, but now it was an active, agonizing vigil. She was fighting a war in the silent landscape of her soul, sending waves of calm into a storm of violence, praying that her fragile, inherited power could be the thread that kept the Lycan king from slipping into the dark. Chapter 7. The Heart of the Woods. Deep in the whispering woods, the world was a tapestry of shadow, pain, and the metallic scent of blood. Alaric lay propped against the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, his leathers cut open to reveal a vicious gash across his ribs. The wound was deep, and a worrying, sluggish blackness seemed to creep from its edges, resisting the efforts of his beta field medic. The rogue's blade had been tainted, cursed with the same foul magic that fueled the shadowed crescent. The skirmish had been an ambush of terrifying efficiency. The rogues had fought with a silent, coordinated ferocity, their eyes glowing with that sickly yellow light. They had targeted him, the Alpha, with single-minded purpose. He had fought them off, his own warriors rallying with desperate bravery, but not before the poisoned steel found its mark. Now, with 13 of his best warriors forming a defensive ring in a small clearing, he could feel the fever beginning to burn through his veins, a fire that chilled him to the bone. Lady Selene knelt beside him, her silver armor smeared with dirt and gore, her beautiful face set in lines of grim concentration. She pressed a clean cloth across the wound. "The poison is slowing your regeneration," she said, his voice clinical. "We need to get you back to the main camp, but the woods are crawling with them. They're hurting us, Alaric." He knew she was right. Every attempted breakout had been met with a wall of snarling, frenzied foes. They were trapped, and the noose was tightening. The pain was a grinding constant, but worse was the creeping lethargy, the fog threatening to cloud his strategic mind. He was the pillar. If he fell, the morale of his warriors would shatter, and they would all be slaughtered. Then, in the depth of the second night, as the cold seeped into his bones and the poison's fever dream began to taunt him with visions of failure, he felt it. A touch, not physical. It was a cool, silvery sensation that flowed into the center of his chest, where the bond, that inexplicable, maddening connection, had taken root. It was like moonlight piercing the forest canopy, gentle and pure, washing over the fever and the pain. It carried with it a profound calm, of steadfastness, and a whisper of Jasmine. Ilara. His name formed in his mind, not as a thought, but a certainty. She was reaching for him. Across the miles, through stone walls and stormy skies, she was sending him her strength. The sylvan blood, the mystery he had been determined to solve, it was this. It was a lifeline. The fog in his mind receded a fraction. He took a deeper, clearer breath. Selene noticed the change immediately, her glacial eyes widening. "Alaric?" "The fog is lifting," he grunted, pushing himself up straighter against the tree. A new resolve, hardened by the tender, distant touch, solidified within him. "We are not waiting for rescue. We are breaking out, now." "That's suicidal," argued Garen, his lead scout, a grizzled wolf with a bandaged arm. "They have the numbers." "They have frenzy," Alaric countered, his voice gaining strength, the alpha command ringing through despite his weakness. "We have strategy, and we have something they do not." He didn't elaborate. He couldn't, but he felt it, the anchor, the calm center Alara provided. It was sharpening his senses, pushing back the poison's confusion.
They attack in waves from the north and east, trying to drive us south into the swamp, so we will not go south." He gestured for the map. By the dim light of a shielded lantern, he pointed, "We go west, through the heartwood thicket." A murmur of unease went through the warriors. The heartwood was dense, treacherous, and said to be watched by old territorial spirits. It was a hunter's nightmare. "It is the one direction they will not expect," Alaric insisted, his gray eyes gleaming with a plan born of clarity. "We move fast and quiet, single file. Garen, you have the best night sight. You lead. Celine, you are rearguard. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. Our goal is the Stone Creek Ford. Kaelin's reinforcements will be coming from that direction." It was a desperate gamble, but it was a plan, and the authority in his voice, bolstered by that mysterious inner fortitude, brooked no argument. As they broke camp with silent efficiency, Alaric focused inward on the silvery thread connecting him to Alara. He couldn't send words or images, but he could send a feeling. He pushed back a pulse of gratitude, of fierce, unwavering determination. "I am coming back. Stay strong." The journey through the heartwood thicket was a harrowing trial. Thorns clawed at them, and unseen roots threatened to break ankles. Every shadow seemed to move, but Alaric's directive held. They were ghosts in the forest. Twice they heard the rogues crashing through the undergrowth mere yards away, but the thicket swallowed them, hiding their scent and sound. Alaric moved on sheer will, each step sending lances of fire from his wound, each breath a battle. But whenever the pain threatened to overwhelm him, he would feel it, a fresh wave of that cool, calming light from the bond. It was as if she was pacing him, a silent companion in the dark, urging him forward. He didn't understand it, but he clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man. After hours of grueling travel, the trees began to thin. The sound of rushing water reached their ears. Stone Creek. Hope, fragile and fierce, surged in the group. They reached the ford as the first hints of dawn tinged the sky gray, and there, on the opposite bank, was Kaelin. The Beta stood with 50 fresh cavalry, their horses stomping softly in the chill. Relief washed over Alaric's warriors. As they waded across the icy creek, Kaelin rushed forward to meet his king, his eyes scanning the ragged group, lingering on Alaric's pallor and the blackened wound. "You cut it close," Kaelin said, his voice tight with emotion. "The lady's dream was timely," Alaric replied, his gaze locking with his Beta's. A world of understanding passed between them in that look. Kaelin nodded, just once. He knew. As the medics descended on him, Alaric allowed himself to be helped onto a stretcher. The immediate danger was over, but as they prepared to ride for camp, he looked back towards the south, towards the palace hidden by leagues of forest. The bond still hummed, a quiet, steadying presence in his soul. She had saved him, not with a sword, but with a whisper of moonlight across his mind. The jealous, possessive king who had claimed her on a whim now owed his life to the quiet strength of the woman he had caged. The battle against the Shadowed Crescent was far from over, but a more personal war had been won in the Heartwood. He had gone north to crush a threat to his kingdom. He was returning with the unshakable knowledge that his true mate, his destined anchor, was waiting for him in a sunlit tower. And the thought of her hazel eyes and her sylvan soul, was the only balm he needed. The hunt was no longer for the truth about her, it was for the future they might build once he defeated the darkness that sought to consume his lands. He would return to her, and this time he would not let her go. Chapter 8. The King's Return. The news of the King's return, wounded but victorious against a key cell of the Shadowed Crescent, swept through the capital like a cleansing wind. Bells rang from the high temples, and a palpable sense of relief eased the tension that had gripped the city for weeks. But in the Sunstone Wing, Alara felt only a frantic, trembling anticipation. The bond, which had been a channel of pain and then of focused energy, had settled into a low, steady hum of proximity. He was close. The constant distant ache had vanished, replaced by a nervous flutter that had nothing to do with magic and everything to do with the man he was. She stood once more on her balcony, but this time she was not watching him leave, she was waiting for his arrival.
The courtyard below was a scene of organized chaos as the returning column filed in. Warriors were greeted by families, wounded were helped towards the healers' halls, and then she saw him. Alaric was on a litter, not horseback, his torso heavily bandaged, his face pale beneath the grey and fatigue, but his eyes were open, and they were scanning the upper windows of the palace with a focused intensity. When his gaze found her, standing like a sentinel in her violet robes, he went still. Even from this distance, she felt the impact of that look, a profound recognition, of a gratitude and of a promise that made her knees weak. He held her gaze for a long moment before being carried inside. Alara retreated into her sitting room, her heart a wild drum against her ribs. What now? The shared secret of the bond, the intimacy of their silent communication during the crisis, had changed everything. She was no longer just a captive curiosity. She was... what? She didn't know. She didn't have to wait long. The door opened, and it was Kalen, not a servant. He gave her a respectful nod, his usual sharpness softened by relief. The king is with the head healer. The poison has been purged, and his Lycan regeneration is finally taking hold.
He will be weak for a few days, but he will recover. He paused. He has asked for you. The simple statement sent a jolt through her. Now? He should rest. He is the king, and he is insistent. A faint, knowing smile touched Kalen's lips. I will escort you. He led her not to the throne room or the council chamber, but to the king's private apartments, a domain she had never seen. They were surprisingly austere for a monarch, stone walls hung with tapestries of historic battles, a large fireplace, shelves of books and maps, and a wide bed currently surrounded by the paraphernalia of healing. The head healer, an old Lycan with kind eyes, was packing his herbs. Alaric was propped up on a mountain of pillows, bare-chested save for the stark white bandages across his ribs. He looked exhausted, vulnerable, and more compelling than ever. The healer and Kalen withdrew with meaningful looks, closing the door, leaving them alone. The silence was immense. Alara stood just inside the door, suddenly unsure of where to look, what to do with her hands. Closer, Alaric said, his voice a rough whisper, worn out from pain and travel, but no less commanding. She obeyed, stopping a few feet from the bed. Up close, she could see the lines of strain, the shadows under his eyes, the paleness of his skin. But his storm-gray gaze was lucid and fiercely intent on her. Alara, his name like a sigh, like a prayer he'd been holding on to. You're alive, she whispered, stating the obvious, emotion thick in her throat. Because of you, the statement was absolute. She shook her head. Kalen's reinforcements, your own strength, your warriors. No. He tried to shift, winced, and settled back. In the woods, when the poison was clouding my mind, I felt you. A cool light, a sense of calm. It cleared the fog. It gave me the focus to find a way out. He held her gaze, willing her to understand. You reached across the kingdom and pulled me back from the edge. How? This was the moment of truth. Kalen knew, or suspected. There was no point in hiding it from Alaric now. My grandmother called it the old blood, Sylvan blood. I am a Sylvan, an empath. I feel things strongly, and apparently I can project calm. When Kalen told me you were in danger, I tried to use what I'd read in the old texts. I didn't know if it would work. A Sylvan, he breathed, the word full of wonder. I thought they were myth, listeners, healers of the soul. A realization dawned in his eyes. That is why my wolf recognized you. It wasn't just a true mate bond. It was a bond to a soul that could understand the silence beneath the roar, a soul that could anchor a king. The way he said it, with awe, not fear or disgust, unlocked something in her chest. For the first time, her difference was not a secret to be hidden, but a gift acknowledged. It is also a curse, I admitted softly. The noise of the court, the aggression, it hurts. I have spent my life hiding from it. You will never have to hide again, he vowed, the possessiveness in his tone now tempered with a fierce protectiveness. Not from that, not from anything.
He reached a hand towards her, palm up, an invitation. "Come here, please." Tentatively, she stepped forward and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong despite his weakness. The contact sent a shock of warmth through the bond, a completion of the circuit that had been open over the miles. It was not electric or passionate, but deeply soothing, profoundly right. A quiet hum of contentment replaced the nervous flutter in her soul. "He have claimed you out of jealousy and instinct," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I kept you out of pride and confusion, but now I ask you to stay, not as a prisoner, not as a ward. Stay as my anchor, as my intended." The world tilted. Intended, the precursor to queen. It was too much, too fast. "Alaric, your court, the alliance you need. Lady Selene fights for a throne," he said dismissively, though a shadow crossed his face at the name. "She wants power. You saw a wounded king and sent him peace. You saw a lonely man and recognized his solitude. The court will adapt. The alliances will be forged differently. I have spent a century ruling for stability. Now I wish to rule for something more, and I cannot do it without you." He was offering for everything, a crown, a purpose, his heart, but the fear remained, cold and sharp. What if my blood is seen as a weakness? What if they call me a witch? What if the shadowed crescent learns of a Sylvan in the palace? They might come for me. His grip on her hand tightened, and his eyes hardened into chips of flint. "Then let them try. I almost lost my kingdom to that darkness. I will not lose you to fear of it. You are my strength, Alara, not my weakness, and I will spend every breath proving that to you and to the world." He was offering not just love, but a partnership, a recognition of her power, not as a weapon, but as a cornerstone. The walls of the violet cage dissolved in that moment, not into nothing, but into the open air of a choice. She could walk away, back to her quiet, hidden life, or she could step into the storm beside him, with her silent magic as her shield, and his unwavering faith as her armor. Looking into his weary, earnest, fierce face, feeling the rightness of their joined hands and the humming bond between their souls, she knew there was no real choice at all. The whisper that started it all had led to this. She tightened her fingers around his. "I will stay," she whispered. A smile, true and unguarded, transformed his face, banishing the pain and the weariness for a moment. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a seal on their promise. "Rest now," he murmured. "The real work begins tomorrow." But as Alara finally left the king's chambers, her heart full to bursting with a terrifying, glorious hope, a cold thought slithered through the warmth. Alaric saw her sylvan blood as a gift to be protected, but the shadowed crescent, those perverters of lunar magic, might see it as something else entirely, a prize to be captured or a threat to be exterminated. In choosing to stay, she had not just accepted a king's love, she had painted a target on her own back, and on the back of the man she was learning to love. The battle in the woods was over. The war for their future was just beginning. Chapter 9. The Court's Crucible. The news, though not officially proclaimed, spread like wildfire through the gilded halls. The king was recovering in the company of Lady Alara of House Morn. He had dismissed all other attendants, even the formidable Lady Selene, who had returned with honors from the front, only to find herself shut out of the royal apartments. The speculation was no longer about a fleeting fascination. It was about a seismic shift in the foundation of power. Alara felt the change in the atmosphere like a shift in the wind. The respectful nods from servants now held a new weight. The guards outside her door stood taller, their protection now feeling less like a cage and more like an honor guard.
But the looks from the courtiers during her now daily walks in the garden were sharper, more calculating. She was no longer a temporary anomaly, she was a permanent fixture, and everyone was trying to determine her place in the new hierarchy. 3 days after Alaric's return, he summoned her to the small royal solar for a private breakfast. He was still pale, moving with careful stiffness, but the light was back in his eyes. Seeing him upright, dressed in a simple dark tunic, his hair still damp from bathing, sent a fresh wave of that confusing, wonderful warmth through her. "The council meets this afternoon," he said over a plate of fruit, his eyes watchful. "I will formally acknowledge your presence at court, and your status as my intended consort." Her fork stilled. "So soon? You're not fully healed. The court is still restless." "Delay will only give my opponents time to organize," he said, his strategic mind fully engaged. "Celine's faction is already murmuring about obscure bloodlines and untested suitability. We must act from a position of strength. My word as king, given from my sickbed, carries the weight of finality. Given from a council chamber, it becomes a debate." He was right, of course, but the thought of standing before that glittering, judgmental assembly made her stomach clench. "What do you need me to do?" "Be yourself," he said simply, reaching across the small table to cover her hand with his. The familiar, soothing hum of the bond pulsed at the contact. "Be the Alara who sees the moon. Be the Sylvan who calmed a king's fever. Your quiet strength is your power. Do not try to mimic Celine's icy poise or the simpering charms of the others. They will try to rattle you. They will ask pointed questions, make veiled insults. Hold your ground. Your truth is your shield." His faith in her was both empowering and terrifying. She nodded, squeezing his hand. "I will try." The afternoon council was held in the Chamber of the Oak, a smaller, more intimidating room than the grand hall, lined with the carved crests of the major packs. The air was thick with tension and the scent of old wood and ambition. Alaric sat at the head of the great table, Kaelin at his right hand. Alara was given a seat at his left, a place of singular honor that drew every eye in the room. She wore a gown of deep emerald green, simple but elegant, her only jewelry the silver medallion hidden beneath the fabric. Celine sat directly across, her beauty as sharp and cold as a diamond. She did not look at Alara, her gaze was fixed on Alaric, a mixture of professional respect and deep personal betrayal. Alaric began without a preamble, his voice still carrying a trace of weakness, but resonating with undeniable authority. "My lords and ladies, you are aware of the bravery shown in the Whispering Woods. The shadowed crescent is a threat that requires our unified focus. But there is another matter, vital to the stability and future of this kingdom." He paused, letting his gaze sweep the room. "I have found my intended consort. Lady Alara of House Morn will be henceforth treated with the respect and deference due to the future queen of Aldoria." A stunned silence, followed by a low murmur that rippled around the table. An elderly lord from a southern pack was the first to speak, his tone dripping with condescension. "Your Majesty, with all due respect, House Morn is a line of scribes. The queen must be from a lineage of warriors, of proven strength. Our enemies will see this as a softening." Before Alaric could respond, Alara found her voice. It was quiet, but it cut through the murmur like a clear bell. "Strength, Lord Braden, comes in many forms. Is the strength of a healer's hand any less than the strength of a soldier's sword? Is the strength to hold a kingdom together in peace any less than the strength to defend it in war?" She met the old lord's surprised gaze steadily. "My house may keep records, but we remember the lessons of history, one of which is that kingdoms crumble from within, from discord and ambition, long before they fall to an outside blade."
The room went quiet again, this time with surprise. She had not cowered, she had not flamed with anger. She had spoken with a calm, incisive logic that was disarming. Celine chose that moment to speak, her voice a silken knife. A pretty sentiment, Lady Alara, but sentiment does not secure borders. Alliances do. The Frostfang pack has supplied a third of your northern army, Alaric. Our warriors have bled for this crown. What assurances do we have that our contributions will be valued under a new arrangement? It was a naked threat. Withdraw support, weaken the kingdom. Alaric's eyes turned to Frost, but Alara spoke again, her intuition guiding her. The Frostfang's bravery and loyalty are recorded in every dispatch from the north, Lady Celine. The king has spoken of it often. A kingdom's strength is indeed in its alliances, and a true alliance is built on mutual respect and shared purpose, not on a single marriage contract. Would the mighty Frostfang wish to be seen as a pack that only fights when its alpha wears a crown, or as the unwavering bulwark of the realm, its glory eternal regardless of who sits on the throne? She had flipped the script. She had questioned not her own worth, but the motive behind Celine's alliance. It was brilliantly done. Kaelin, watching from beside Alaric, allowed himself a small, approving nod. Celine's porcelain composure cracked for a single, furious second before she smoothed it over. She had no good answer that would make her seem selfish and disloyal. Alaric seized the moment. Lady Alara speaks wisdom beyond her years. The old ways of cementing power are changing. We face an enemy that uses division and frenzy. We must respond with unity and clear-minded strength. My choice is made. It is not open for debate. Our focus now must be entirely on the shadowed crescent.
Celine was the last to leave. She paused by Alara's chair, her voice a low, venomous whisper meant only for her. A clever performance, Sylvan, but the court is not a library. Real power is not won with words. Watch your back. The shadows are longer than you think. She swept out, leaving a chill in her wake. Later, alone with Alaric in the solar, Alara let out a shuddering breath, the adrenaline finally draining away. I think I made an enemy for life. She was already your enemy, Alaric said, pulling her gently into his arms, careful of his wound. He rested his chin on her head. But you were magnificent. You were calm. You were regal. You were everything I knew you could be. Leaning into his solid strength, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, Alara allowed herself a moment of triumph. She had faced the court's crucible and not broken. But Celine's final whisper echoed in her mind. The shadows are longer than you think. The battle in the council chamber was won, but Celine's threat was a reminder that the war in the shadows was just getting started, and the enemy within the palace walls might be even more dangerous than the one in the woods. Chapter 10. Whispers of the Past. The official acknowledgement of Alara as the king's intended changed everything and nothing. Her status was now a fact of court life, a reality to be grudgingly accepted or subtly undermined. She was given a larger retinue, including a stern but efficient lady-in-waiting named Mistress Orla, and her lessons in court etiquette, history, and protocol began in earnest. But amidst the grueling schedule of a queen in training, Alara clung to her hours in the archives. It was no longer just an escape, it was a mission. Celine's venomous whisper about Sylvan had confirmed her worst fear. Her secret was no longer just hers and Alaric's. If Celine knew or suspected, how many others did? And what would they do with that knowledge? She needed to understand the full history of her bloodline, not just for herself, but to anticipate the attacks that might come. With Kaelin's discreet permission, she gained access to the sealed vaults below the archives.
Here, in the cool, dry air, the most sensitive and ancient records were kept. The dust here was centuries old. Guided by the faint, instinctual pull of her blood, she found a section dedicated to prescribed lore and extinct clans. After days of careful searching, her fingers, coated in fine gray dust, closed on a slim, unbound folio of parchment. The cover was blank, but the first page bore a delicate, faded illustration of a woman with silver hair, her hands outstretched towards a crescent moon, with wolves sleeping peacefully at her feet. The title, in elegant, spidery script, read, "On the Sylvan Kindred, Their Gifts and Their Silence." Her heart in her throat, she carried the folio to a reading desk. The text was a mixture of historical account and lyrical observation, written by a long-ago royal scholar. It spoke of the Sylvans as the moon's first children, Lycans who channeled the passive, reflective power of the moon, rather than its transformative, bestial fury. They were empaths, healers, dream walkers, and guardians of places of natural power, like moonwells. They lived in harmony with their wolves, their transformations said to be seamless and silent, a melting into the mist, rather than a painful, cracking shift. But the text grew darker. It described a schism, centuries past. A faction of Lycans, hungry for more aggressive, controllable power, began to experiment with forcing the change, with harnessing lunar energy through pain and frenzy. They viewed the Sylvan peaceful Sylvans as weak, as an evolutionary dead end. They called themselves the Shadowed Crescent. The war was not of territory, but of ideology, Illyra read aloud in a whisper, the words chilling her. The Shadowed Crescent sought to eradicate the Sylvan weakness from the bloodline. They hunted them, not just to kill, but to corrupt, using dark rites to twist the empathic gifts into tools of torment and madness. The Sylvans, unprepared for such brutality, were decimated. The last known enclave vanished into the northern mists, their fate unknown. It is believed the cult, denied its primary prey, turned inwards, perfecting its frenzy on its own members, becoming the secretive, monstrous sect we now know only from whispers and omens. Illyra's hands trembled. So that was the connection. The Shadowed Crescent wasn't just a random cult of rogue Lycans. They were the ancient, bitter enemies of her own bloodline. Their very existence was born from a desire to exterminate what she was. And now they had returned, stronger and more organized than anyone believed possible. And Alaric had brought a Sylvan, the last remnant of their hated foes, right into the heart of the palace. The implications were staggering. If the cult learned of her existence, she wouldn't just be a political target, she would be a holy grail, a living symbol of the weakness they sought to erase, or perhaps a source of untapped power to pervert for their own ends. And Alaric, by bonding with her, had made himself and his kingdom their ultimate enemy. She had to tell him immediately. She found him in his strategy room, deep in consultation with Kalin and his generals over maps detailing the latest Crescent sightings. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes, which had been hard with concentration, softened at the sight of her. But they sharpened again when he saw the fear on her face and the ancient folio clutched in her hand. "Leave us," he told the others. Kalin herded the generals out, giving Illyra a searching look before closing the door. "What is it?" Alaric asked, coming around the table to her. Wordlessly, she handed him the folio open to the crucial page. He read in silence, his face growing grimmer with each line. When he finished, he closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle ticking in his jaw. "So it is a blood feud, and you are the prize." "I'm a liability," Illyra corrected, her voice trembling. "Alaric, they won't stop. They've returned for a reason, and now they have a personal crusade. They will come for me, and they will tear this kingdom apart to get to me." He opened his eyes, and they blazed with protective fury.
Then let them try. This changes nothing about my intentions, Ilara. It only clarifies the enemy." He took the folio and set it on the table with a definitive thud. "For a century I have fought shadows, putting down rogue uprisings without understanding their root. Now I know. They are not mindless beasts, they are zealots on a holy war. And you," he cupped her face, his touch gentle but his expression fierce, "you are not a liability, you are the key. You understand their origin. Your gifts, the very gifts they sought to destroy, may be the weapon we need to defeat them. Empathy against frenzy, calm against chaos." His perspective was so different from my own terror. He saw me not as a victim, but as an asset. "How? I can barely shield myself from a crowded room."
"We will learn," he said with absolute certainty. "Together. Kaelin will scour the archives for any mention of Sylvan defenses, any rituals. You will train, not just in court manners, but in harnessing your gift." He pulled her into a firm embrace, his voice a rumble against her ear. "You are my intended, Ilara, my mate, my queen, and I will not let a centuries-old cult of madmen take you from me. We fight them, and we win." His conviction was a fortress around her crumbling courage. He was right. Hiding was no longer an option. Her very existence was a declaration of war. She had to stop being the quarry and learn to be the hunter, in her own way. That evening, under Kaelin's supervision, they began. In the secluded Moonwell garden, Ilara tried to do more than just project calm. She tried to listen. She placed her hands on the cold stone and opened her senses, thinking not of Alaric, but of the forest, of the taint of the shadowed crescent. She sought the wrongness she had felt in her vision. At first, there was only the peaceful hum of the dormant well. Then, as she deepened her focus, pushing past her fear, she felt it, a faint, discordant thread, like a note of rot on the wind. It was distant, coming from the northeast, and it was moving, not randomly, with purpose. "I can feel them," she whispered, her eyes flying open. "A group. They're traveling fast, towards the Silver Falls region." Kaelin exchanged a stunned look with Alaric. Silver Falls was a lightly guarded mining territory. A dispatch had just arrived that morning reporting missing scouts in that area, but no confirmed enemy movement. "You're certain?" Alaric asked. She nodded, the strange certainty of the sensations settling in her bones. "It's the same feeling, the same sickly yellow energy." Alaric didn't hesitate. He turned to Kaelin. "Send a company of our fastest riders to Silver Falls. Ambush position. Use the intelligence from the lady's sight." It was a leap of faith, using mystical intelligence for military deployment, but Alaric trusted her, and 2 days later the report came. The royal company had intercepted a band of 24 shadowed crescent fanatics preparing to overrun a mining village. The ambush was a complete success, with minimal casualties. The cultists had been carrying maps of the palace sewers. Ilara's gift had just saved countless lives and possibly thwarted an assassination plot. She was no longer just a secret or a symbol. She had become a strategic weapon. The king's Sylvan intended was not a weakness. She was a secret advantage. But as she lay awake that night, the success tasted bittersweet. She had found her purpose, but it had painted the biggest target in the world on her back. The cult now had a name for their enemy, the last Sylvan, and they would stop at nothing to snuff out her light. Chapter 11. The Gilded Trap. Victory at Silver Falls was a potent tonic for the court's lingering doubts. Whispers about Ilara's obscure bloodline were now mingled with odd murmurs about her uncanny foresight. The king, it was said, had a seer at his side, a blessing from the moon herself. Ilara's new role as a strategic advisor, conducted in private with Alaric and Kaelin, gave her a sense of grim purpose, but it also isolated her further from the normal rhythms of court life, making her even more an enigmatic figure. Lady Selene watched this shift with the patience of a glacier. Her public opposition had been silenced by the king's decree and Alara's proven value, but her ambition had not cooled. It had simply been driven underground. She began to weave a more subtle, more dangerous trap. She started with kindness. It was disarming. She began to greet Alara in the corridors with a polite, if cool, nod. She publicly commended the timely intelligence that saved the miners, though her smile never reached her eyes. She even offered, through a mutual acquaintance, to share her knowledge of northern terrain to help interpret Alara's sensations. Alaric was wary. "Do not trust her," he warned Alara during one of their private evenings. "Selene's pride is a wounded beast. It will not heal. It will fester." "I know," Alara replied, "but if she is making an effort at civility, refusing it makes me look small and paranoid. The court is watching." He grunted, unhappy but seeing the political logic. "Then be civil, but be careful. Kaelin will have someone watching her." The opportunity for Selene's trap presented itself during the planning for the upcoming Moon Ascendance Festival, a celebration of the first full moon after the Solitus. It was a major event involving a public procession, blessings at the Great Temple, and a feast. Traditionally, the organization fell to the highest-ranking female at court, which had always been Selene. To the surprise of many, Selene requested a meeting with Alara. They met in a sunny morning room, Selene pouring tea with elegant precision. The moon ascendance is a delicate balance of tradition and spectacle. As the kings intended, much of the attention will be on you this year. It is an opportunity to present a united, graceful front to the people. She slid a detailed schedule across the table. "I have taken the liberty of drafting the procession route and the temple ceremonies. I believe it would be a powerful gesture if you were to take a leading role in the blessing of the moonwell in the public gardens. It is a site of peaceful reflection, very much in keeping with your tranquil nature." It seemed like a genuine, even generous offer. Placing Alara at a moonwell played to her perceived strengths. Alara studied the schedule. It all looked in order. "Thank you, Lady Selene. This is very thorough." Selene's smile was thin. "We all serve the kingdom, do we not? There is one small tradition," she added casually. "The one who gives the moonwell blessing traditionally wears a specific ceremonial diadem, the Luna Stella. It is kept in the temple vaults. I have already arranged for it to be brought to your chambers on the morning of the festival, for your approval." It seemed a minor detail. Alara nodded. "That's very thoughtful." The trap was set. The day of the moon ascendance dawned clear and cold. The palace was a flurry of activity. Alara was dressed in a sheer silvering white, embroidered with tiny crystals that caught the light like frost. She felt a nervous excitement. This was her first major public appearance as the kings intended, a chance to connect with the people beyond the court's gossip. As promised, a velvet case was delivered. Inside, nestled on black silk, was the Luna Stella diadem. It was beautiful, a slender silver band set with a single large pearl at the center, flanked by delicate clusters of moonstones. It looked ancient and serene. Mistress Orla helped her secure it in her hair. It felt cool against her brow, a pleasant weight. The procession through the capital was a blur of cheering crowds, bright banners, and the overwhelming surge of public emotion. Alara, riding in a carriage just behind Alaric on his stallion, practiced the shielding techniques she'd been learning, focusing on Alaric's steady presence at the head of the column to ground herself. She managed to smile and wave, the diadem glittering on her brow. They arrived at the public gardens where a large ornamental moon well, a clean, newer construction compared to the palace's ancient one, stood surrounded by fragrant night-blooming flowers. A crowd of citizens and courtiers gathered around. The temple high priestess, an elderly woman with kind eyes, waited by the well. As Alara stepped forward to begin the blessing, she felt a strange sensation. The diadem on her head, which had felt cool, began to grow warm. Not unpleasantly so, but noticeably. A low, resonant hum seemed to emanate from it, vibrating in her skull. She pushed the feeling aside, attributing it to nerves and the midday sun. She reached the edge of the well, raised her hands as practiced, and began the traditional invocation. By the gentle light of the watching moon, we seek blessing, peace, and... The words died in her throat. The hum from the diadem became a piercing whine. The warm pearl at its center began to glow with a faint, sickly yellow light, and then the visions hit her, not as a gentle pull from a distance, but as a violent, deafening assault. Screams, the rending of flesh, the coppery scent of blood, eyes glowing with frenzied yellow fire, the carved symbol, the thorned crescent flashing everywhere, and a voice hissing, chanting in her mind, "Weak blood, sylvan filth, you will burn with us." It was a psychic attack, channeled and amplified through the diadem. The cult had gotten to it. They had corrupted this sacred object, turning a symbol of peace into a weapon of torment, and Celine had placed it on her head. Alara gasped, staggering back from the well, her hands flying to her temples. The crowd murmured in confusion. The happy, celebratory emotions of the people around her were suddenly drowned out by the projected frenzy and hatred from the diadem. It was too much. Her sylvan empathy, wide open for the blessing, was now a funnel for pure nightmare. She cried out, a sound of pure anguish, and collapsed to her knees. "Ilara!" Alaric's roar cut through the chaos. He was by her side in an instant, his arms around him. He saw her terror, the way her eyes were wide and unseeing, fixed on some inner horror. His gaze shot to the diadem, now pulsing with that vile yellow light. With a snarl, he ripped it from her hair and flung it away. It hit the stone paving with a clatter, the glow instantly dying. But the damage was done. Ilara was trembling violently, trapped in the aftershock of the vision, the cult's malevolent chant still echoing in her skull. The crowd was in an uproar. The blessing had turned into a scene of chaos and fear. Alaric gathered her into his arms, ignoring his own wound, and carried her swiftly back to the carriage, his face a mask of apocalyptic fury. His eyes scanned the stunned crowd, the panicked courtiers, and settled, for one searing second, on Lady Celine. Celine stood perfectly still, her expression one of appropriate shock and concern, but Alaric saw it, the fleeting, cold satisfaction in her glacial blue eyes, before she expertly concealed it. She knew. Perhaps not the specifics of the psychic trap, but she knew the diadem was tainted. She had orchestrated Ilara's public humiliation and breakdown, discrediting her as unstable, as cursed, right in front of the entire kingdom. As the carriage sped back to the palace, Ilara clinging to him and shaking, Alaric's vow was a silent, deadly promise in his heart. Celine had just declared war, and this war he would wage personally. The gilded trap had sprung, but instead of breaking Ilara, it had revealed the true serpent in their midst, and the Lycan king was done playing politics. Chapter 12. The Alpha's Judgment. The return to the palace was a silent, grim journey. Ilara, wrapped in Alaric's cloak, shivered not from cold, but from the deep psychic chill left by the attack. The violent, hateful images were seared in her mind, and the cult's chanting echoed like a poison in her veins. She felt violated in a way she never had before. Her innermost gift, her empathy, had been weaponized against her. Alaric growled, the words vibrating with lethal intent. He paced like a caged wolf. He paced like a caged wolf. Kaelin entered, his face taut. He had already retrieved the discarded diadem, holding it in a lead-lined box. The temple archivists are in an uproar. The Luna Stella was sent out for cleaning 3 days ago to a lesser-known jeweler in the city. That shop was found empty this morning, the jeweler gone. The cult has agents inside the capital. This was a planned, sophisticated strike. And Celine was their unwitting or witting handmaiden, Alaric finished. He stopped his pacing, his decision made. The time for council politics and subtle maneuvering was over. The alpha, the protector, the enraged mate was taking control. Bring her, now, to the Chamber of Truth. The Chamber of Truth was not a place of trial. It was a place of alpha judgment, used only in the most grave internal pack matters. Its walls were bare stone, and it held only one chair in the center. It was a room designed for stripping away pretense. Ilara insisted on coming. She was weak, her head throbbing, but she needed to see this. She needed to face the woman who had tried to destroy her. Alaric supported her as they walked, his arm a solid bar of steel around her. Celine was brought in by 2 of Alaric's personal guards. She had been taken from her own apartments without ceremony. She was still dressed in her festival finery, a gown of frost blue, but her composure was no longer flawless. There was a wary tension in her eyes as she took in the stark room, the king's terrifying stillness, and Ilara's pale, determined face. "Your Majesty," Celine began, her voice carefully modulated, "this is highly irregular, to be dragged here like a common criminal." Silence. Alaric's command was not loud, but it was a physical force that pressed the air out of the room. He took a step toward her, and the full, unchecked power of the Lycan king, the alpha of alphas, radiated from him.
"You know what had been done to it?" Celine lifted her chin. "I knew it was sent for cleaning, as is tradition. I sought to honor her with a central role in the festival. If some dark magic has touched it, that is a tragedy, and the fault lies with the temple guards and the missing jeweler, not with me." "Do not insult my intelligence," Alaric said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You have opposed this union from the start. You saw an opportunity to discredit her, to make her look unstable or cursed in front of the entire city. You may not have bargained for a psychic assault, but you hoped for a stumble, a failure. You delivered her to a platform and saw to it the boards were greased. The fact that they were also poisoned is a difference of degree, not of kind." Celine's mask finally cracked, revealing the furious ambition beneath. "And why should I not oppose it?" she spat, her cool elegance burning away. "For decades I have stood by your side. I have led your armies, advised your council, strengthened your borders. I am from a line of kings, and you choose this, a mouse from a dead house, a creature who flinches at loud noises and communes with weeds. She will be the death of this kingdom. She is weak." "She is stronger than you will ever be," Alaric said, and the absolute conviction in his voice was more devastating than any shout. "Her strength is in resilience, in compassion, in a power you are too blind and too hardened to understand. You see a weapon or a weakness. I see a partner. You sought to break her today. You failed. You only showed me and everyone the corruption in your own heart." He turned to Kaelin. "The Lady Celine of the Frostfang Pack is hereby stripped of her position on the Royal Council and her command of the northern regiments. She is exiled from the capital. She will return to her pack lands and remain there. Any attempt to influence court politics, any communication with known agents of the Shadowed Crescent, or any movement of Frostfang troops without my direct command will be considered treason and will be met with the full wrath of the Crown." It was a brutal punishment. Exile, loss of status, loss of power. It stopped just short of declaring her pack an enemy for the sake of the warriors who had fought loyally.
Celine's face went as white as her namesake moon. She had gambled everything and lost. "You would choose her over the stability of your realm," she whispered, venom and disbelief mingling. "She is the stability of my realm," Alaric said, his final word on the matter. He turned his back on her, his attention returning to Alara. The dismissal was absolute. As the guards led a stunned, defeated Celine away, Alara let out a shaky breath. The public nightmare had been followed by a private, brutal justice. It was terrifying and cathartic. Alaric came to her, his fierce expression softening. "It is done." "She will hate you forever," Alara said. "Let her hate. Her hate is a candle next to the inferno the cult wishes to unleash." He guided her from the chamber. The attack today proved two things. First, the cult is here in the city, and second, they are terrified of you. They did not try to kill you physically. They tried to shatter your mind, to discredit your gift. They fear what you are, Alara. They fear the power you represent. He was right. The assault had been designed to break her spirit, to make her a gibbering, frightened figure in the public eye. It had failed. Back in Alaric's chambers, as a quiet evening settled, Alara felt a new resolve hardening within her, forged in the fire of the day's trauma. The cult had shown its hand. Celine had been neutralized. The shadows were receding, revealing the true battlefield. "I want to learn to fight back," she said, her voice firm. "Not with a sword, with my own gift. I don't just want to sense their madness. I want to repel it. I want to turn their own weapon against them." Alaric looked at her, seeing not the trembling girl from the Moonwell, but the queen she was becoming, steadfast, scarred, and fiercely determined. He saw the fire in her hazel eyes, a fire that was lit by hatred, but would be fueled by love and justice. "Then we will find a way," he promised, taking her hand. The bond between them, tested by poison, distance, and now psychic attack, hummed stronger than ever, a cable of shared resolve. "We will scour every ancient text. We will consult every wise one left in the kingdom. You will learn to shield, not just yourself, but others. You will learn to project more than calm. You will learn to project truth, to shatter their frenzy with clarity." The moon ascendance had begun as a celebration and ended as a declaration of war, but from the ashes of the gilded trap, a new purpose was rising. Alara, the last Sylvan, was no longer content to be the hunted. She would become the hunter, and the Lycan king would be at her side, not just as her protector, but as her partner in forging a new kind of strength, one that could heal a kingdom and silence the ancient hateful cult forever.
She understood the concept of shields not as walls, but as filters, like the membrane of a leaf, allowing in light and air but blocking toxins. She grasped the idea of projection not as a blunt force, but as a resonant frequency, finding the discordant note of the cult's frenzy and harmonizing it back to stillness, or overwhelming it with a purer, stronger tone of peace. "It's like singing a lullaby to a rabid beast," she tried to explain to Alaric and Kaelin afterwards, her eyes bright with exhausted discovery. "Their madness has a pattern, a vibration. My calm has another. I have to make my song louder, truer." The theory was one thing, practice was another. They needed a test subject, a source of controlled aggression. Alaric volunteered, but Alara refused. The bond was too deep, too personal. She couldn't risk hurting him, and his wolf's aggression towards her was non-existent now, replaced by fierce devotion. Kaelin, ever pragmatic, found a solution. He brought in a trusted warrior from the royal guard, a beta known for his steady nerves. In a secured training yard, the beta was instructed to summon his battle fury, to channel aggression without true malice. The first attempts were disasters. Alara, standing across from the snarling, posturing Lycan, would flinch as the wave of aggressive energy hit her. Her instinct was to withdraw, to fold in on herself. Her projected calm was a feeble whisper against the beta's roar. She grew frustrated, tears of effort stinging her eyes. "I can't. It's too loud." Alaric, watching from the sidelines, wanted to call it off, but Kalen shook his head. "She must learn, Your Majesty. The cult will not be gentle." It was the Beta guard who helped her. During a break, he approached respectfully. "My lady," he said, "when I fight, the fury is not in my mind first. It's in here." He thumped his chest. "It's a heat, a fire in the blood. Maybe don't try to quiet the mind. Try to cool the blood." His simple soldier's insight was a revelation. She had been trying to combat the emotion intellectually, but the cult's frenzy, like a Lycan's battle rage, was a primal, physiological thing. The next attempt, she changed her approach. As the Beta began to growl and shift, his eyes flashing amber, Alara closed her own eyes. She ignored the aggressive posturing and reached out with her empathy, not for his anger, but for the source of it, the racing heart, the flooding adrenaline, the burning energy. She imagined not a song, but a cool, silver mist, like the first breath of winter, seeping not into his mind, but into his bloodstream, his muscles. She projected the feeling of a deep, steadying breath, the sensation of a cooling stream, the memory of a peaceful, moonlit forest. The Beta's growls faltered. He blinked, shaking his head as if clearing water from his ears. The aggressive tension drained from his shoulders. He looked down at his hands, now back to human form, with confusion. The fire just went out," he said, in awe his voice. "I felt completely calm, too calm to fight." A triumphant, disbelieving laugh escaped Alara. She had done it. She hadn't just soothed his mind, she had directly counteracted the physiological triggers of his Lycan mage. Alaric was at her side in an instant, his own eyes wide with pride. "You found it." "I found a starting point," she corrected, elated but practical. One calm Beta is not a horde of fanatical cultists. Their frenzy is magical, forced. It will be harder to break. But they had a foundation. Over the next weeks, Alara trained like a warrior. She practiced extending her cooling mist over greater distances, on multiple subjects at once. Kalen arranged for small groups of guards to simulate a frenzied attack. She learned to layer shields, to keep a part of her mind serene and anchored, while another part worked to dismantle the aggression around her. The effort was exhausting. Each session left her pale and drained, requiring hours of quiet meditation at the true moonwell to replenish her own energy. But she grew stronger. Her control became finer. She could now pinpoint a single hostile intention in a crowd and neutralize it without affecting anyone else. One evening, as they reviewed progress in Alaric's strategy room, Kalen presented a new piece of intelligence. "Our spies have finally tracked the corrupted Lunastella diadem, or rather the magic residue from it. It was used as a focus in a ritual near the old Sylvan ruins in the northern Mistwoods. The cult isn't just hiding there, they're actively digging, searching for something." "Sylvan ruins?" Alara's blood ran cold. What could they possibly want there? If they hate your bloodline so much, perhaps they seek to desecrate a holy site, or perhaps they seek to steal something, an artifact, knowledge. A terrible thought occurred to Alara, born of her newfound understanding of her gifts. What if they're not just trying to erase us? What if they're trying to complete their perversion? The old text said they wanted to twist empathic gifts into tools of torment. What if they've been trying all this time and failing because they lack a true Sylvan source? What if they want a living Sylvan, or something a Sylvan left behind, to finally perfect their madness? The room went cold. The idea was horrifyingly plausible. The cult's attack on her hadn't just been to discredit, it had been a test, a sampling of her power, and now they were digging at the roots of their people's history. "We cannot let them have it," Alaric stated, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Whatever they are looking for, we find it first." A new mission, more dangerous than any before, took shape. They would not wait for the cult to strike again.
They would take the fight to their heart in the mist-shrouded ruins of the Sylvan homeland. Alara would go, not as a passive seer, but as an active agent, the only one who could navigate the ancient magic of the place, and the only one who might be able to counter what the cult sought. The scholar had become a student, the student had become a practitioner, and now the practitioner would become a warrior. The silver light of the Sylvan, so long silent, was about to be forged into a blade and carried into the deepest dark. Chapter 14. Into the Mistwoods. The journey to the northern Mistwoods was a somber, swift march. Alaric led a hand-picked force of 50 of his most elite warriors, Lycans known for their stealth, discipline, and unwavering loyalty. Ilara rode in the center of the column, swathed in a hooded travel cloak, her senses stretched taut. Kaelin was at the king's side, the ever-present strategist. The festive silvers and cheerful banners of the capital were replaced by muted greens and grays, the colors of the forest and the fog.
As they traveled north, the land changed. The rolling hills and fertile valleys gave way to dense, ancient forests, where the trees grew so close their branches intertwined, blocking out the sun. A perpetual damp mist clung to the ground, muffling sound and reducing visibility to a few dozen yards. It was a disorienting, eerie place, the perfect hiding spot for a cult and the haunted grave of a people. Ilara felt the weight of the place immediately. It wasn't the aggressive wrongness of the cult, it was a deep, resonant sorrow, a melody of loss so profound it echoed in the very air. She heard it not with her ears, but with her soul. The ghost of sylvan song, the memory of peace, now blanketed by silence and mist. It made her heart ache, but it also, strangely, made her feel stronger. This was her heritage. These whispering trees, this silver fog were in her blood. Using the intelligence from Kaelin's spies and her own empathic pull towards the source of ancient power, they navigated the treacherous woods. They moved like ghosts, Alaric's orders given in hand signals. The only sounds were the squelch of boots on damp earth, the occasional drip of moisture from leaves, and the distant, lonely cry of a bird. On the third day, they found the ruins. It wasn't a city of stone. The Sylvans, in tune with nature, had lived within it. Great hollowed-out ancient trees formed dwellings, their interiors smooth and graceful, now overgrown with moss and fungus. Bridges of woven living vine had long since collapsed. At the center of the clearing was the heart of the settlement, a great flat stone dais, and in its center a moon well. But this well was not dry. It held water, black and still as obsidian, reflecting the gray sky above. And around it, the evidence of the cult's search was everywhere. Digging pits scarred the soft earth, trees were defaced with the thorned crescent symbol. The sense of violation was a physical stench in the air, overlaying the deep sorrow. But the cultists themselves were gone. The place was deserted, silent. "They found what they were looking for," Kaelin murmured, examining a recently disturbed patch of earth near the dais. Alaric's face was dark. Or they were interrupted. Spread out. Search for any clue, any indication of what they took or where they went, but carefully. This place may be booby-trapped. The warriors fanned out. Ilara walked slowly towards the central moonwell, drawn to it. This was the heart of her ancestors' power. As she approached the black water, she didn't feel fear, but a solemn reverence. She knelt at its edge, ignoring the damp seeping through her clothes. Without thinking, she reached out a hand towards the water. "Ilara, don't!" Alaric started, but it was too late. Her fingertips broke the surface. The water was icy cold, a shock not of malevolence, but of immense concentrated memory, shot up her arm. This well was a repository, a legacy. Images and sensations flooded her, not of the cult, but of the Sylvans in their prime, graceful beings moving through the mist, hands glowing with soft light as they healed a wounded animal, voices raised in harmonious song that made the very leaves vibrate.
They saw ceremonies under the full moon, a communion so deep it brought tears to their eyes. And then they saw the end. The arrival of the shadows, the proto-cultists, not with frenzy, but with cold, calculated cruelty. They saw their ancestors trying to reason, to soothe, their empathic gifts bouncing off hardened, hate-filled hearts. They saw the first violent shift, the first betrayal. They saw the Sylvans, unprepared for such brutality, gathering their most precious artifacts, small crystalline orbs that pulsed with captured moonlight, and hiding them. One was hidden here, in the well itself, wrapped in roots and silence. The vision ended. Ilara pulled her hand back, gasping. They were looking for light wells, she breathed, the name coming to her from the vision. Orbs that store pure lunar energy. My ancestors used them to amplify their healing, to bless the land. The cult, they would use them to amplify their frenzy, to spread their corruption like a plague. Did they find it? Asked Alaric urgently, crouching beside her. Ilara looked into the black water, focusing her will. She pushed past the memory, seeking the present. She felt for the silvery signature of the light well. There was a faint, fading echo, and then nothing. It was like a scent on the wind that had just dissipated. It was here, very recently, but it's gone. They took it. Despair threatened to swamp her. They were too late. At that moment, a shout came from the tree line, one of the warriors. Alaric and Kaelin were on their feet, moving swiftly. Ilara followed. The warrior pointed to the ground. There, half hidden in the moss, was a trail, not of boots, but of a dragged, heavy object, and beside it, scattered like discarded trash, were several of the corrupted thorned crescent pendants the cultists wore. They left in a hurry, Kaelin observed, and they're burdened. They have the artifact. Alaric examined the trail, which led deeper into the mistwoods, towards the jagged peaks known as the Howling Crags. Here taking it to a place of height for a ritual, under the full moon. He looked at the sky. The mist obscured it, but they all knew the full moon was tomorrow night. He made a swift decision. We follow. We travel light and fast. We intercept them before they reach the crags. We take back the light well. As the warriors prepared to move out, Ilara stood by the desecrated moonwell, her hand resting on the cold stone. The sorrow of the place was now mingled with a fierce, protective fury. The cult had stolen a piece of her soul's history, a tool of creation, to turn it into an engine of destruction. She looked at Alaric, at the determined set of his jaw, at the warriors ready to follow him into the mist. She was no longer a burden to be protected. She was the key to this fight. Her gift, honed in the palace yards, would be tested in the field against the true source of the madness. She pulled her hood up, the damp mist beating on the wool. "Let's go get it back," she said, her voice steady, carrying a new steel-like quality. The hunt was on. The last Sylvan and the Lycan king were marching into the heart of the mist to reclaim a legacy of light from the hands of darkness. The final battle for the soul of the kingdom was no longer a distant threat. It was waiting for them in the shrouded crags, under the eye of the full moon.
Chapter 15. The Howling Crags. The pursuit through the mistwoods was a race against the setting sun and the rising moon. The cult's trail, marked by the scar of the dragged artifact and their own reckless haste, was easy to follow, but led them into increasingly treacherous terrain. The ground sloped upward, the mist thinning as they climbed, replaced by a biting wind that carried the distant, mournful sound that gave the Howling Crags their name. Ilara pushed her body to its limits, her physical stamina fortified by a burning purpose. The closer they got, the stronger she felt the wrongness, a pulsing, sickly beacon of corrupted lunar energy. The stolen light well was no longer dormant. The cult was preparing it, bending it to their will. It felt like a splinter of pure chaos digging into the world. Just before dusk, they crested a ridge. Below them lay a narrow, rocky valley, and at its far end, the sheer black face of the tallest crag. There, in a crude amphitheater formed by fallen boulders, was the cult. There were perhaps 60 of them, a larger force than anticipated. They moved with a jerky, frantic energy, setting up foul-looking altars of black stone and painting the thorned crescent symbol in what looked like blood on the rocks. In the center of the clearing, on a raised dais, stood a tall, skeletal figure in ragged robes, the cult leader. In his hands he held the Sylvan Lightwell. Even from this distance, Alara could see it. The orb, which should have glowed with soft silver moonlight, was now a throbbing, diseased yellow, like an infected wound. Dark tendrils of energy snaked from it, connecting to the cultists, who grew more agitated with each pulse. "They're siphoning the corrupted energy," Alara whispered to Alaric, who lay beside her, scanning the layout. "They're using it to fuel a mass frenzy, a ritual to turn themselves into an unstoppable horde and then unleash it, probably on the nearest settlement, or to march on the capital itself." "We hit them now," Alaric decided, his voice low and deadly. "Kaelin, take 20 and flank from the east. I will lead the main assault from this ridge. Our priority is that orb. Get it away from the leader." Alara grabbed his arm. "Alaric, you can't just fight them. In that state, fueled by the orb, they won't feel pain, they won't know fear. You'll be overwhelmed. I have to go down there. I have to break the connection." "Absolutely not," he snarled, his protective instinct flaring. "It's a death trap." "It's the only way," she insisted, her hazel eyes blazing with a light he'd never seen before, the full force of her sylvan will. "My gift is the counter to theirs. I can dampen the frenzy, break the orb's hold on them. If you attack while they're still linked, it's a slaughter for both sides. Give me a distraction, a small window. I can do this." He saw the truth in her eyes, the same certainty that had guided them to Silver Falls. This was her battlefield. To deny her was to choose a path of brute force that would cost countless lives and might still fail. He hated it, but he trusted her. "Kaelin," he said, the words torn from him, "on my signal, you create a diversion at the eastern edge. Draw as many as you can. I will lead a charge straight for the dais, drawing the leader's guard." "Ilara," he turned to her, cupping her face, his eyes full of fear and fierce pride. "You will have maybe 3 minutes. Get to the orb, do what you must, and then get out. Promise me." "I promise," she whispered, leaning into his touch for a fleeting, grounding second. They moved into position, the sky deepened to indigo, and the first sliver of the monstrous full moon broke over the crags. The cult leader raised the pulsating light well, beginning a guttural chant. The yellow energy flared, and the cultists threw back their heads and howled, the sound not of wolves, but of damned souls. Alaric's signal was a roar that shook the stones. He shifted mid-leap, a magnificent, terrifying beast of midnight fur and molten gold eyes, leading his warriors down the slope like an avalanche of fang and claw. Simultaneously, Kaelin's force erupted from the eastern rocks with a clash of steel. Chaos erupted. The cultists, deep in their ritual trance, were slow to react at first, but the corrupted energy made them ferocious. They fought with a mindless, savage strength, ignoring grievous wounds. Ilara, a small, dark figure, slipped down the opposite side of the ridge, using the chaos as her cover. The wave of frenzied aggression hit her like a physical wall, a tsunami of hate and madness that stole her breath. She stumbled, her shield straining. She focused on the techniques she'd mastered, imagining herself as a stone in a raging river, letting the fury wash around her but not move her. She filtered the worst of it, focusing on her goal, the throbbing yellow heart of the corruption. She reached the edge of the dais unseen. The skeletal leader was focused on Alaric, who was a whirlwind of destruction, carving his way through the guardian cultists, his eyes fixed on the orb. Alara climbed the rough stone steps. The corrupted energy was so thick here it felt like wading through tar. It whispered to her promises of power, of release, of joining the glorious frenzy. She gritted her teeth, clinging to the memory of the sylvan song from the well, to the feel of Alaric's hand on her cheek.
She stepped onto the dais directly behind the leader. He sensed her. He whirled, his eyes hollow pits of yellow light. The little sylvan ghost, come to witness the triumph of true power or to be the final sacrifice.
He thrust the orb towards her, a concentrated blast of frenzied energy meant to shatter her mind, roared out. Ilara didn't flinch. She raised her hands, not in defense, but in offering. She didn't try to block the corruption. She opened herself to it. And then she sang, not with her voice, but with her soul. She projected everything she was, everything she had learned, the cool silver mist that could douse Lycan rage, the deep resonant peace of the moonwells, the sorrowful loving memory of her ancestors, the fierce protective love for Alaric, the unwavering hope for a peaceful kingdom. She poured it all into a single pure silvery note of light and truth, and she directed it not at the cult leader, but into the heart of the corrupted Lightwell. The two forces, ancient perverted hatred and newborn defiant love, collided inside the orb. For a second, nothing happened. Then the orb screamed, a sound of shattering glass and twisting metal. The sickly yellow light flickered wildly, fought against the invading silver radiance. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface. The cult leader shrieked, clutching the orb as it grew burning hot. The tendrils of energy connecting him to his followers snapped and recoiled. All around the amphitheater, the cultists faltered. The mindless frenzy in their eyes wavered, replaced by confusion, then by dawning horror as they saw the carnage they had wrought, felt the wounds they had ignored. The magical compulsion was breaking. Alaric, seeing his moment, lunged. In one fluid motion he shifted back to human form, snatched a sword from a fallen warrior and swept it in a gleaming arc. The cult leader's head, still locked in a rictus of shock, tumbled from his shoulders. The skeletal body collapsed. The cracked orb fell from its lifeless hands. Ilara dove, catching it before it could shatter on the stone. It burned her palms, the war of energies still raging inside it. She fell to her knees, cradling it, pouring every last ounce of her sylvan essence into it, cleansing, healing, remembering it what it was meant to be. The yellow light died, the cracks sealed with threads of molten silver. The orb grew cool in her hands, its light softening to a gentle, radiant moonlight, pure and clean. Silence descended on the howling crags, broken only by the moans of the wounded and the sobs of broken cultists coming to their senses. The battle was over. Alaric was at her side, shifting back, his clothes torn and bloody, his own wounds steaming as they began to heal. He dropped to his knees before her, his hands framing her face, checking her for injuries. "Ilara?" She looked up at him, exhausted beyond measure, but with a profound peace in her hazel eyes. In her hands, the purified lightwell glowed, bathing them both in its gentle luminescence. "It's over," she whispered. "The heart of the frenzy is broken." He pulled her into his arms, holding her and the glowing orb between them. Around them, his warriors secured the broken cultists. The full moon, now high and clear, shone down on a scene of ended horror and hard-won peace. In that moment, on the blood-stained stones of the crag, with the ancient light of her people restored in her hands, and the fierce, loyal heart of her king beating against hers, Ilara knew. The whisper that began at the solstice led through jealousy, fear, pain, and war. It had led her here to her destiny, not as a prisoner, not as a pawn, but as a queen, as a sylvan healer who had faced the darkness and reforged a light, as the true mate of the Lycan king. She was home.